The alarms screaming through the lower levels of Vought International Tower were not the standard fire alerts that drilled the employees during safety week. These were the high-frequency containment breach sirens, usually reserved for when a soup went psychotic in the labs. But the rhythm was wrong. It was not the chaotic smashing of a tantrums-throwing god, but the rhythmic, precise destruction of a machine. On the 42nd floor, a tactical response team clad in black composite armor flew backward as if struck by a wrecking ball, yet there was no machinery in the hallway. They hit the reinforced glass walls with bone-shattering force, sliding to the floor in unconscious heaps. In the center of the corridor stood a man who looked entirely out of place in the chrome and neon aesthetic of Vought's headquarters. He wore a simple red tunic with black lining, his breathing steady and calm amidst the carnage. Shang-Chi did not look like a Supa. He did not have the bulging veins of a compound Vi user or the arrogant posture of someone who believed themselves untouchable. He stood with his feet rooted to the carpet, his hands open and relaxed. The air around him seemed to shimmer slightly, not from heat, but from a pressure that the Vought sensors could not categorize. The biometric scanners on the wall were flashing red, attempting to read his V levels and finding absolutely nothing. To the security system, this man was a baseline human. Yet he had just dismantled a squad of Vought's elite security forces in under 12 seconds. A second wave of guards rounded the corner, these ones equipped with heavy energy suppression rifles designed to take down mid-tier heroes. They raised their weapons, shouting conflicting orders, panic evident in their voices. They were trained to fight flying bricks and laser eyes, not a man who moved like smoke. As the first guard squeezed the trigger, Shang-Chi stepped forward. He did not run. He simply shifted his weight. The energy bolt missed his shoulder by a fraction of an inch, scorching the wall behind him. Before the guard could correct his aim, Shang-Chi was inside his guard. A palm strike hit the soldier's chest plate. Physics dictated that a human hand hitting ceramic armor should break the hand. Instead, a shockwave of golden energy rippled through the armor, bypassing the protection entirely and stopping the guard's heart for a split second before sending him flying into his squad mates. This was the disruption that Vought had never calculated. Their entire empire was built on the monopoly of physical power derived from a blue liquid in a vial. They understood biology. They understood mutations. They did not understand Chi. They did not understand a discipline that allowed a human to shatter steel through will alone. The security feed in the main control room flickered as the camera lens cracked from the residual energy in the air. Deep in the server room down the hall, the man was not just breaking bones. He was looking for something. The violence was surgical. He was clearing a path to the archives that held the deepest, darkest secrets of Vought's history. And for the first time in decades, the corporation was effectively defenseless against an intruder. The seven were scrambled. Jets were launching from the upper pads, and the media blackout protocols were initiated. But it was already too late to stop the signal that was beginning to bleed out into the world. The timeline had fractured the moment his foot touched the pavement of New York City, and the false gods of this world were about to bleed. The shattered glass of the Vought International lobby crunched under the boots of the tactical response team swarming the building, but the man who had caused the destruction was already gone. Shang-Chi had not exited through the front doors in a blaze of glory. Instead, he had utilized the confusion, slipping into the ventilation shadows and descending through the service shafts with the silence of a ghost. He emerged 3 blocks away in a damp alleyway that smelled of garbage and stale beer, the adrenaline of the combat fading into a disciplined, rhythmic breathing pattern. He pressed a hand against the brick wall, closing his eyes to sense the energy of this place. It was wrong. The chi of this New York City was sickly, a chaotic and muddy current that felt nothing like the dimension he called home. There was no hum of hidden magic, no undercurrent of ancient spirits, only a deafening roar of electricity, greed, and a strange biological wrongness that seemed to permeate the very air. He adjusted his tunic, which drew stares from the few pedestrians hurrying past the alley mouth, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The massive screens in Times Square were not broadcasting news of an alien invasion or a magical threat. They were playing advertisements. A man in a star-spangled cape, his smile tight and terrifyingly perfect, held up a bottle of energy drink. A woman in a warrior's outfit posed next to a luxury sedan. Shang-Chi stopped, staring up at the digital gods of this world. In his timeline, heroes were burdened with responsibility, often hated or feared, and always fighting a losing battle against cosmic odds. Here, they were products. The dissonance made his stomach turn. He needed information. He needed to understand the strategic layout of this battlefield before he could figure out how to return home. High above in the Vought boardroom, the mood was not one of panic, but of icy, controlled fury. Stan Edgar stood by the window, looking down at the city with an expression of mild annoyance. Behind him, the heavy oak doors blasted open, splintering off their hinges. Homelander floated into the room, his eyes glowing with a low-level red intensity that signaled imminent violence. He did not land. He hovered 3 inches off the expensive carpet, his cape twitching in the stagnant air. He looked at the screen displaying the security footage of the corridor massacre. He saw the guard fly backward. He saw the palm strike that crumpled the ceramic armor. He saw the lack of laser burns, the lack of ice, the lack of super speed blur. He saw a human man moving at human speeds, doing impossible things. Homelander landed, the soft thud echoing in the silent room. He pointed a gloved finger at the screen. He demanded to know who the terrorist was. He demanded to know which rival company had grown a soup in a lab and failed to register him. Edgar turned slowly, his pulse rate unchanged. He informed Homelander that they had run facial recognition, gait analysis, and thermal profiling. The intruder was not in the Vought database. He was not in the federal database of registered soups. According to their satellites and their spies, this man did not exist until 3 hours ago. Homelander scoffed. He claimed that was impossible. He claimed that no human could punch through a Class 4 ballistic vest. It was an insult to his existence. If humans could do that, what made him special? The question hung in the air, unspoken but toxic. Edgar simply adjusted his glasses and instructed Homelander to find him, but to do it quietly. The stock price would plummet if the public learned that a baseline human had humiliated their security team. This was not a supervillain fight. This was a pest control issue. Shang-Chi walked through the crowded streets of Manhattan, his senses dialed to their maximum sensitivity. He wore a stolen jacket now, a cheap gray hoodie he had plucked from a donation bin to cover his red tunic. He looked like any other drift in the city, but his mind was working through tactical scenarios. He had found a discarded newspaper and seen the date. It was the correct year, but the history was warped. No Avengers, no Stark Industries, only Vought. He read about the Seven. He read about the collateral damage lawsuits settled out of court. He read about the Compound Phi scandals that were buried on page 6. The picture was becoming clear. This was a world where power had been democratized to the wealthy and the sociopathic. He sat on a park bench, closing his eyes to meditate, trying to reach out to the Great Protector, to any familiar spirit. There was only silence. The silence was terrifying. It meant he was cut off from the source of his greater power. He was left only with his body, his training, and the chi he could cultivate from his own life force. He opened his eyes and saw a group of teenagers filming something near the fountain. A man in a spandex suit, green and jagged like a reptile, was harassing a hot dog vendor. The hero, known as Gecko, was laughing, demanding free food. pushing the cart over when the vendor hesitated. The teenagers cheered. They thought it was a bit. They thought it was content. Shang-Chi watched the vendor's fear. It was a small injustice, trivial compared to the cosmic wars he had fought. But it was the exact kind of bullying his father had taught him to despise. And later, the kind of bullying he had sworn to stop. Miles away, in a basement that smelled of stale cigarettes and burning electronics, Billy Butcher stared at a grainy monitor. Huey Campbell stood behind him, wringing his hands, looking at the frozen frame of Shang-Chi's face. Frenchie was typing furiously at a keyboard, trying to enhance the image. Butcher took a drag of his cigarette and exhaled a cloud of gray smoke at the screen. He pointed at the intruder's stance. He noted that the feet were planted. He noted the open palms. Butcher had seen combat. He had seen SAS training. He had seen Supo brawls. This was neither. This was something ancient. He told the boys that this was not a soup. He told them that Vought was panicking because they couldn't market this. A soupy gone rogue was a tragedy they could spin. A human who could slap a tactical team around was a threat to the product. If people realized they didn't need the blue juice to be strong, the whole house of cards would tumble. Huey asked if they should recruit him. Butcher laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He said they weren't going to recruit him. They were going to weaponize him. But first, they had to get to him before Vought did. Frenchie shouted that he had a hit. Facial recognition from a traffic camera in Central Park. The target was stationary. Butcher grabbed his crowbar and headed for the stairs. He told them to load up the van. The confrontation in the park escalated quickly. Gecko, drunk on minor fame and perhaps actual alcohol, kicked the hot dog vendor in the ribs. The old man crumpled, gasping for air. The crowd laughed harder. Shang-Chi stood up. The movement was fluid, lacking the aggressive jerkiness of a fight starter. He walked toward the fountain. He did not shout. He did not posture. He simply stepped between the vendor and the soup. Gecko stopped, blinking. He looked down at the smaller man in the gray hoodie. He asked if the guy wanted an autograph or a hospital bill. Shang-Chi spoke for the first time since arriving in this universe. His voice was calm, level, and carried a weight that silenced the teenagers filming. He asked the creature to apologize and help the man up. Gecko laughed. It was a wet, incredulous sound. He wound up for a backhand, a casual strike meant to break a jaw and teach a lesson. It was a move that relied entirely on super strength and zero technique. Shang-Chi did not block. He stepped inside the arc of the swing. His left hand guided Gecko's wrist upward, using the soupe's own momentum against him, while his right palm struck the solar plexus. It was not a punch. It was a transfer of energy. Gecko's durability was skin deep, a result of compound 5 hardening the dermal layers. But Chi ignored the skin. It traveled through the water in the body, striking the nerves and the organs directly. Gecko's eyes bulged. The air left his lungs in a wheezing gasp. He folded over, clutching his chest. The teenagers stopped filming. The silence in the park was sudden and absolute. Shang-Chi stepped back, his hands returning to a neutral position. He told the soup to leave. Gecko, humiliated and gasping, scrambled backward. His regeneration was kicking in, the pain fading, replaced by a blinding rage. He wasn't a top-tier soupy, but he was strong enough to tear a car door off its hinges. He roared, his skin shifting, hardening further, and charged. This was the test. Shang-Chi needed to know the limits of these beings. He saw the charge coming in slow motion. The footwork was sloppy. The center of gravity was too high. They relied so much on their power that they had never learned how to fight. Shang-Chi dropped into a low stance. As Gecko lunged, Shang-Chi swept his leg. It was a basic move, taught in the first week of any dojo, but executed with the perfect timings of a master. Gecko hit the pavement face first, cracking the concrete. Before he could rise, Shang-Chi was on him. He did not strike to kill. He struck to disable. He hit pressure points, the cluster of nerves in the shoulder, the meridian in the thigh. Gecko screamed, his limbs going numb, his super strength useless because the signals from his brain could not reach his muscles. Shang-Chi stood over him, looking at the crowd. They were terrified. They weren't looking at him like a hero. They were looking at him like a monster. In this world, violence was only acceptable when it came from a cape. When a normal man did it, it was anarchy. The sound of a van screeching to a halt broke the tension. The side door slid open with a rusted groan. Billy Butcher leaned out, wearing his signature trench coat, a manic grin on his face. He shouted at the kid in the hoodie to get in, unless he wanted to explain his magic karate to the Homelander, who was currently breaking the sound barrier about 30 seconds out. Shang-Chi looked at the van. He sensed the chaotic, violent energy radiating from the man in the coat, but he also sensed a lack of deception. It was a raw, honest kind of darkness. He looked at the sky. A sonic boom rippled through the clouds, distant but closing fast. He made a calculation. The enemy of my enemy is a strategic asset, until proven otherwise. Shang-Chi sprinted for the van. He dove inside just as the tires spun, burning rubber as they peeled away from the curb. Inside the van, the air was thick with tension. Huey was driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Frenchie was in the back, checking a scanner. Mother's Milk was staring at Shang-Chi with a look of professional appraisal. Butcher sat opposite him, lighting another cigarette. He asked Shang-Chi who he was. Shang-Chi did not answer immediately. He adjusted his sleeves. He looked at the men around him. They were soldiers, damaged and weary. He told them his name. He told them he was a traveler who had lost his way. Butcher chuckled. He told Shang-Chi that he had kicked the hornet's nest. He explained that Gecko was a nobody, a bottom feeder. But he was Vought property. You don't damage company property without the company coming to collect. Shang-Chi asked about the man in the sky. Butcher's smile faded. He told him about Homelander. He described a god with the mind of a spoiled child. He described a being that could not be hurt, could not be stopped, and could do whatever he wanted. Shang-Chi listened. He thought of the Mandarin. He thought of the Dweller in Darkness. He had fought gods before, but he had fought them with the 10 rings. Without them, he was mortal. The van wove through the traffic of Queens, heading for a safe house. Shang-Chi observed the city passing by. He saw the Vought propaganda everywhere. It was a fascist state disguised as a celebrity culture. He realized that his mission had shifted. He could not just find a way home. As long as he was here, he had a moral obligation. His father had sought power to control the world. These soups had power given to them to entertain it. Both were perversions of the natural order. He looked at Butcher. He asked what they did. Butcher blew smoke at the ceiling. He said they spanked the bastards when they got out of line. He said they were the ones who kept the score. Shang-Chi nodded. It was a crude philosophy, but it aligned with the immediate necessity of survival. Suddenly, the van swerved violently. A thud shook the roof, denting the metal inward. The vehicle skidded across 3 lanes of traffic, slamming into a guardrail. Glass shattered. Huey screamed. Butcher swore, racking the slide of a heavy-caliber rifle. The roof was peeled back like the lid of a sardine can. Hovering above them was not Homelander, but a figure clad in black stealth armor. Black Noir. He did not speak. He did not taunt. He simply dropped into the van, his knives drawn. This was not a public relations hero. This was an assassin. Vought had sent the silencer. The close quarters of the van made firearms dangerous and clumsy. Butcher tried to bring his rifle to bear, but Black Noir was faster, kicking the weapon out of his hands and backhanding Butcher into the metal wall of the van. Frenchie scrambled for a flashbang, but Noir pinned his hand to the floor with a throwing knife. It was efficient. It was brutal. It was nearly perfect. But Noir had calculated for brawlers, for soldiers. He had not calculated for a master of the close-range arts. Shang-Chi did not need space. He needed inches. As Noir lunged for Huey, Shang-Chi intercepted the arm. He didn't just block it. He flowed around it. He used the confined space to his advantage, trapping Noir's limb against the van's crumpled roof. He delivered a short, sharp elbow strike to Noir's temple. Noir's head snapped back. The assassin paused, perhaps for the first time in years, surprised by the speed. He was a soupe with enhanced reflexes and strength, but his fighting style was a mix of military combatives and brute force. Shang-Chi was water. Shang-Chi shifted his stance, delivering a flurry of strikes, chest, throat, knee, each one accompanied by a burst of focused chi. Noir stumbled back, falling out of the open back of the moving van. He tumbled onto the highway, rolling instantly to his feet, but the van was already speeding away. Shang-Chi stood at the open doors, watching the dark figure recede. His hands were vibrating slightly. Hitting Noir had felt like hitting a tank. The density of the muscle was absurd. Without the rings, a prolonged fight would be fatal. He turned back to the interior of the van. Butcher was wiping blood from his lip, looking at Shang-Chi with a new expression. It wasn't just interest anymore. It was hunger. Butcher realized he had just found the only thing on the planet that could punch a soup in the face and live to tell about it. The van limped into an underground parking structure in a derelict part of the city. The silence of the safe house was heavy. They unloaded their gear. Frenchie tended to his hand. Huey was hyperventilating in the corner. Butcher poured a drink and slid a glass across the rusted table to Shang-Chi. He didn't ask for a backstory this time. He asked for an alliance. He told Shang-Chi that Vought would never stop hunting him now. He was an anomaly, a glitch in the Matrix. They would dissect him to find out how he worked. The only way to survive was to take the fight to them. Shang-Chi looked at the amber liquid in the glass. He thought of his sister, Xialing. She would have already taken over a gang by now. He thought of Katie. She would be making a joke. He was alone, but he was not helpless. He took the glass. He told Butcher that he would not kill for him. He would not be an assassin, but he would help them expose the truth. He would help them break the illusion. Butcher grinned, a shark showing its teeth. He agreed to the terms. No killing, just hurting. Lots of hurting. He pulled a file from his coat pocket and threw it on the table. It was a dossier on a Vought research facility in New Jersey. He told Shang-Chi that if he wanted to know why this world was broken, the answers were in there. They were making something new. Something that made Homelander look like a Boy Scout. And they needed someone who could walk through walls to get it. Shang-Chi looked at the photo in the file. It was a picture of a blue vial, but the liquid inside was swirling with a gold instability. It looked like a corruption of the chi he wielded. A cold dread settled in his stomach. If Vought was trying to synthesize chi using Compound 5, the result would be catastrophic. He nodded. The pact was made. The timeline had shifted from a curiosity to a crusade. The board was set, and for the first time, the pieces were moving in a way Vought could not predict. The dragon had entered the maze. The safe house was a suffocating box of tension, the air thick with the smell of gun oil and cheap takeout. Shang-Chi sat cross-legged on the cold concrete floor, attempting to cycle his breath, but the energy of this world was abrasive. It felt like trying to meditate inside a jet engine. Across the room, Billy Butcher was stripping a high-caliber rifle with aggressive, jerky movements, the metallic clack of the bolt echoing like a gunshot. Huey Campbell watched Shang-Chi with a mixture of awe and terrifying anxiety, while Frenchie and Mother's Milk argued in hushed tones over a schematic of the New Jersey facility. The dynamic was volatile. These men were not warriors in the traditional sense. They were insurgents, driven by trauma and a thirst for vengeance that bordered on the suicidal. Shang-Chi opened his eyes. He had agreed to this mission because the dossier contained images of a corrupted energy signature, something that looked like the soul eaters he had studied in the ancient scrolls, but synthesized in a test tube. Vought was not just playing with biology anymore. They were trying to drill into the spiritual bedrock of existence with a jackhammer. The drive to the facility took them through the industrial desolate zones of New Jersey, past rusting refineries and warehouses that looked abandoned, but hummed with high-voltage electricity. Butcher briefed them in the van. The target was a sub-basement laboratory beneath a Vought pharmaceutical distribution center. Intelligence suggested this was where Vought disposed of their mistakes, but recently, the power consumption had spiked by 3,000%. Butcher called it a target of opportunity. Shang-Chi called it a wound in the world. When they arrived, the perimeter was tighter than a military base. Automated turrets, motion sensors, and patrols of supes who didn't make the cut for the 7. Street-level enforcers with minor durability and strength. Infiltration began in silence. Frenchie disabled the external sensors with a signal jammer, creating a 10-second window. Shang-Chi moved first. He did not need the cover of darkness as much as he needed the rhythm of the patrol. He watched 2 guards standing by the loading dock. They were bored, checking their phones. Shang-Chi vaulted the fence, his landing silent. He moved across the asphalt like a shadow lengthening at sunset. He reached the guards before they looked up. A strike to the carotid artery of the first, a sweep of the leg and a sleeper hold on the second. No killing, just unconsciousness. He signaled the van. The boys moved in, heavy with gear and weapons, their boots loud compared to Shang-Chi's slippers. Butcher sneered at the unconscious guards, raising a knife, but Shang-Chi placed a hand on his forearm. The grip was iron. Butcher glared but lowered the blade. They were there for the lab, not the doormen. They breached the interior, descending through layers of security that grew progressively more sterile and disturbing. The air temperature dropped. The smell of ozone and antiseptic became overwhelming. On the 3rd sublevel, they found the observation deck. Below them, through reinforced glass, was a circular chamber. In the center sat a containment unit holding a young woman. She was strapped to a chair, tubes running into her veins, pumping a glowing golden liquid that pulsed with the erratic, violent light. Shang-Chi felt the bile rise in his throat. It was qi, but it was harvested, refined, and stripped of its life-affirming properties, turned into raw fuel. The woman was screaming, but no sound came through the glass. Her skin was cracking, golden light bleeding through the fissures. Frenchie hacked the terminal, his hand shaking as he read the data. He whispered that they were trying to create a generator. They were trying to use a human conduit to tap into an extra-dimensional energy source. They called it Compound C. Butcher spat on the floor and said it was just another way to sell batteries. Shang-Chi touched the glass. He could feel the woman's pain resonating through the barrier. Her spirit was being shredded. He told them they had to get her out. Butcher shook his head. He said the mission was to destroy the data and the samples. The girl was collateral. She was already dead. Shang-Chi turned to Butcher, his eyes hard. He said that in his world, you did not leave people behind to burn. He moved to the door. Butcher raised his rifle, aiming it at Shang-Chi's back. He warned him that if he opened that door, he would trip the containment alarm. Shang-Chi didn't hesitate. He hit the release mechanism. The alarms were immediate and deafening. Red lights bathed the facility in a hellish glow. The door to the chamber hissed open. Shang-Chi rushed to the chair, ripping the tubes from the woman's arms. She looked at him, her eyes burning with golden fire. No recognition in them, only agony. She was a vessel overflowing with water, about to burst. Shang-Chi placed his hands on her shoulders, trying to use his own chi to stabilize her flow, to ground the lightning storm raging inside her. He closed his eyes, chanting a mantra of binding. For a second, The golden light dimmed. The woman gasped, a human sound. But then the blast doors on the far side of the chamber blew inward. A figure stepped through the smoke. It was not a security team. It was Shockwave personified. A soupy clad in tactical gear, known as Shockwave. A speedster who had been demoted to guard duty after losing a race to A-Train. He vibrated with impatience. He looked at the intruders and laughed. He said Vought had been waiting for a stress test. He vanished. The impact hit Shang-Chi like a cannonball. He was thrown across the room, smashing into the concrete wall. His ribs groaned, hairline fractures spiderwebbing across the bone. Shockwave was fast, faster than the eye could track, but he was linear. Shang-Chi slid to the floor, coughing. He had fought speedsters before, but without the 10 rings, he could not create a defensive perimeter. He had to predict. Butcher and the others opened fire from the observation deck, bullets sparking harmlessly as Shockwave simply wasn't there when the rounds arrived. The speedster circled the room, creating a cyclone that lifted the loose equipment and turned it into shrapnel. He was toying with them. He ran past the girl in the chair, slapping her, inducing a scream of rage that sent a pulse of golden energy rippling through the room. Shang-Chi stood up. He focused. He could not see the enemy, so he stopped looking. He listened to the displacement of air. He felt the vibration in the floor. He centered his weight. The air pressure dropped to his left. Shang-Chi didn't punch. He spun, extending his leg in a hook kick that targeted the space where Shockwave would be in a microsecond. The heel of his shoe connected with the speedster's throat. Physics took over. Shockwave, moving at Mach 1, ran face first into an immovable object. The kinetic energy backfired. The soup cartwheeled through the air, crashing into the main console, his neck at an unnatural angle. He gasped, clutching his throat, his speed gone, reduced to a choking man on the floor. But the damage was done. The console Shockwave had smashed was the regulator for the containment unit. The golden liquid in the tanks began to boil. The woman in the chair arched her back, a beam of pure, uncontrolled energy erupting from her chest, punching a hole through the ceiling and slicing through the floors above. The facility began to shake. Butcher screamed over the comms that the reactor was going critical. They had to leave. Now. Shang-Chi looked at the woman. Her skin was dissolving into light. She was becoming a bomb. He realized he could not save her. The realization was a cold knife in his gut. If he stayed, he died, and he saved no one. If he left, she died alone. He made the choice of a tactician, not a hero. He vaulted back up to the observation deck. He grabbed Frenchie and Mother's milk, shoving them toward the exit. Butcher was already running. They sprinted through the corridors as the walls buckled. The concrete cracked, golden light seeping through the fissures like molten lava. The sound was not an explosion. It was a tearing. The fabric of reality in the basement was being ripped apart by a power that did not belong in this universe. They burst out of the loading dock doors just as the ground beneath the warehouse liquefied. A pillar of golden light rose into the night sky, silent and beautiful and terrifying. It expanded outward, a shockwave of spirit energy. It didn't burn like fire. It erased. The warehouse disintegrated. The parking lot turned to dust. The van was flipped over, rolling across the asphalt. Shang-Chi and the boys were thrown into a drainage ditch, the mud shielding them from the direct line of sight. Shang-Chi covered his head, feeling the energy wash over him. It tasted like metal and sorrow. It was the screaming of 1,000 souls compressed into a single moment. When the light faded, the silence returned, heavier than before. Shang-Chi stood up, brushing the dirt from his jacket. Where the facility had been, there was now a crater, smooth and glass-like, glowing with a faint phosphorescence. But the destruction had not been contained. The shockwave had traveled. A mile away, the small town of East Brunswick was dark. Not just power outage dark. The streetlights were bent, cars were stalled, and from the distance, the wail of sirens began to rise. The energy pulse had acted like an EMP for biology. It hadn't vaporized the town, but it had hit the people. Shang-Chi ran toward the town, ignoring Butcher's shout to get back to the vehicle. He had to see. He reached the first row of houses. A family was stumbling out of their front door. They weren't burned. They were lethargic, their movements heavy, their eyes dull. The golden V radiation had drained their chi. It had sapped their life force. They were alive, but they were hollowed out, aging decades in seconds. Shang-Chi fell to his knees. This was his fault. He had triggered the release. He had brought his war to this place. He looked at his hands. They were trembling. In his world, magic had rules. Here, magic was just another weapon, and it was radioactive. Butcher pulled the van up, the side door sliding open. The vehicle was battered, windshield cracked, but running. He jumped out and grabbed Shang-Chi by the collar, dragging him toward the seat. He shouted that Vought recovery teams were 3 minutes out. Homelander would be here in 2. If they were found here, they were dead. Shang-Chi looked at the hollow people. He looked at Butcher. The difference between the two worlds snapped into focus. In the MCU, heroes saved the day. In this world, survival was the only victory. He got in the van. As they sped away, the news reports were already breaking on the dashboard radio. Vought was spinning the narrative. A terrorist attack. A foreign metahuman cell. They were blaming the mysterious Kung Fu insurgent. They claimed the facility was a pediatric research hospital. They showed fake footage of burning teddy bears. The lie was being constructed in real time, cementing Shang-Chi not as a liberator, but as a mass murderer. Inside the van, the mood was funeral. Mother's milk was bleeding from a shrapnel wound in his shoulder. Frenchie was staring at his hands, muttering in French. Huey was crying, silent tears streaming down his face. Butcher was driving, his eyes fixed on the road, a grim satisfaction on his face. He told them that this was good. This was war. Now the world knew that Vought could bleed. He didn't care about the town. He cared that the facility was gone. Shang-Chi sat in the back, isolated. He meditated, but he did not seek peace. He sought clarity. He had underestimated the cruelty of this dimension. He had treated Vought like a warlord, a conqueror. But they were a cancer. You don't fight cancer with a punch. You fight it by cutting it out. He realized that his moral code, the strict rigidity of his training, was a liability here. He needed to adapt. He needed to be water, but not the gentle stream. He needed to be the tsunami. He looked at the boys. They were broken men fighting a god. They needed a leader who understood that the difference between a hero and a villain was often just who wrote the history books. The catastrophe had changed him. The golden V was out there now. The data Frenchie had downloaded before the crash sat on a hard drive in his pocket. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a map. Vought wasn't just building bombs. They were trying to open a door. And if Shang-Chi didn't stop them, they wouldn't just ruin this world. They would find a way to his. The stakes had escalated from survival to containment. He touched the hard drive. He closed his eyes. The dragon was awake, and it was angry. The hollow sickness from the town was spreading. Reports were coming in of first responders collapsing. The energy was contagious. It was a plague of spiritual exhaustion, and Shang-Chi was patient zero. He looked at his own hands. Faint, golden veins were pulsing under his skin. He had absorbed some of the fallout. He wasn't just carrying the guilt, he was carrying the weapon. He was now connected to the Vought network in a way he couldn't understand. He could feel a pulse in the distance, a heartbeat. Something else had survived the explosion, something that was calling to him. The catastrophe was not the explosion. The catastrophe was what had been born from it. The sewers beneath New York City were a labyrinth of forgotten infrastructure and filth, a fitting reflection of the situation the group now found themselves in. The air was heavy with methane and the metallic tang of drying blood. Shang-Chi sat on a discarded crate, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The golden veins that had appeared on his hands after the New Jersey explosion had crawled up his forearms, glowing with a sickly, pulsating rhythm that matched his erratic heartbeat. This was not the clean, flowing chi he had spent his life cultivating. This was a cancer. It felt like his meridians were being pumped full of battery acid. Every time he moved, the energy spiked, threatening to tear his muscles apart from the inside. He closed his eyes, attempting to center himself, but the spiritual silence of this universe was gone, replaced by a screaming static that clawed at his mind. He was not just carrying an infection. He was becoming a broadcast tower for the very energy that had hollowed out the town of East Brunswick. Billy Butcher paced the damp concrete walkway, the heels of his boots clicking, echoing in the tunnel. He was manic, fueled by stimulants and the thrill of the hunt. He held the hard drive Frenchie had decrypted, waving it like a religious text. The data confirmed their worst fears and Butcher's darkest hopes. Project Shen was Vaught's attempt to bridge the gap between biological enhancement and metaphysical manipulation. They had found scrolls, stolen artifacts from a raid in Southeast Asia decades ago, and tried to reverse engineer the life force of the universe using Compound 5 as a catalyst. The result was a corrupted energy that didn't elevate the spirit. It consumed it to fuel the body. The Golden V wasn't a super soldier serum. It was a parasitic energy source. And now, Shang-Chi was the host. Butcher looked at the master of Kung Fu with a predatory gleam. He didn't see a dying man. He saw a walking dirty bomb. He told Shang-Chi that the sickness spreading through the suburbs was proof of concept. If they could harness it, if they could aim it, they wouldn't just be able to kill soups. They could turn them off. They could drain the V right out of their veins. Shang-Chi opened his eyes, the gold light dimming in his irises. He stood up slowly, fighting the nausea. He told Butcher that he was insane. The energy was not a weapon to be aimed. It was a corruption that needed to be purged. The people in East Brunswick weren't just tired. Their souls were being eroded. To use this against anyone, even Homelander, was a crime against nature. He refused to be a carrier for a plague. Butcher stepped closer, invading Shang-Chi's personal space. The tension was palpable. Butcher sneered that Shang-Chi still thought he was playing by the rules of a comic book. He pointed out that they were in the mud. There was no high ground here. There was only the boot and the face. If Shang-Chi wanted to save the world, he had to be willing to break it a little more. Shang-Chi grabbed Butcher's wrist. He didn't squeeze hard, but the threat was clear. He said he would find a cure. He would heal the people, and then he would find a way home. He released Butcher and walked toward the tunnel exit. He needed fresh air. He needed to think. Frenchie called out from his computer station, his voice trembling. He had picked up a signal. It wasn't a police frequency. It was a Vought internal channel. They weren't searching the city grid by grid anymore. They were converging. The tracking wasn't based on cameras or heat signatures. They were tracking the energy signature of the Golden V. Every time Shang-Chi used his power, every time the sickness flared, he was sending up a flare. They knew exactly where they were. The realization hit the group like a physical blow. They weren't hiding. They were waiting in a trap. A heavy thud shook the ceiling of the sewer tunnel. Dust rained down. Then another thud. Something heavy was punching through the street above them. The ceiling imploded. Debris and concrete rained down into the sewage water. Through the hole, a figure descended, hovering in the shaft of light. It was not Homelander. It was Stormfront. She floated with an air of casual superiority, electricity crackling around her hands. She looked down at the rats in the sewer and smiled. She called them vermin. She spotted Shang-Chi, and her eyes narrowed. She said Edgar wanted the specimen alive, but he didn't say he had to be whole. She unleashed a bolt of plasma lightning. Shang-Chi moved. Despite the sickness, despite the agony in his veins, his body remembered the forms. He shoved Huey and Mother's milk into a drainage pipe just as the lightning struck the walkway, vaporizing the concrete. The explosion threw Shang-Chi backward, skipping across the foul water. He scrambled to his feet, his wet clothes heavy, the golden veins flaring brighter in response to the threat. Stormfront landed, her boots splashing in the muck. She didn't monologue, she attacked. She flew forward, a blur of purple electricity and Aryan arrogance. She threw a punch that could shatter a tank. Shang-Chi deflected. He used the soft style, redirecting her momentum, letting her fly past him into the tunnel wall. But the contact burned. When his skin touched the electricity, the golden V reacted. A shockwave of nausea buckled his knees. Stormfront laughed, pulling herself out of the rubble. She mocked his style. She called it a parlor trick. She gathered charge in both hands, levitating the water around her, turning the sewer into an electrified kill zone. Shang-Chi knew he couldn't dodge this. The water connected everything. He had to disrupt the source. He took a stance he had never used before. It wasn't from Ta Lo. It was something instinctual, driven by the parasite inside him. He didn't draw chi from the earth. He drew it from the corruption. He pulled the sickness into his palms. The pain was blinding. As Stormfront released the lightning storm, Shang-Chi thrust his palms forward. A beam of golden, dirty light erupted from his hands. It collided with the purple plasma. The energies clashed, screaming like dying animals. The tunnel shook. The structural supports began to groan. Butcher, hiding behind a pillar, watched with wide eyes. He saw what happened next. The golden light didn't just block the lightning, it ate it. It crawled up the plasma stream like a snake, reaching Stormfront. She screamed, a sound of genuine confusion and fear. The golden energy hit her chest. It didn't burn her skin. It went deeper. For a split second, the electricity around her flickered and died. She dropped out of the air, hitting the water with a heavy splash. She scrambled up, looking at her hands. She tried to summon a charge. Nothing happened. Sparks fizzled and died. The golden V had temporarily neutralized the compound 5 in her system. Shang-Chi collapsed, vomiting blood. The effort had nearly killed him. The golden veins were now black, looking like necrosis. Stormfront stared at him, terror replacing her arrogance. She realized she was mortal. For the first time in decades, she was just a woman in a sewer. The sound of sirens and approaching heavy footsteps echoed from the tunnel entrance. More Vought assets were coming. Butcher broke cover. He grabbed Shang-Chi, hauling him up. He shouted at the team to move. They couldn't finish Stormfront. They had to run. They scrambled into the deeper tunnels, leaving the bewildered and powerless Soupy shivering in the filth. The escape was a blur of darkness and pain. They emerged miles away in a subway maintenance depot. Shang-Chi was drifting in and out of consciousness. The corruption was spreading to his organs. But the dynamic had shifted permanently. Butcher laid Shang-Chi down on a workbench. He looked at the others. The fear was gone from Butcher's eyes, replaced by a cold, tactical certainty. He told them they had just found the silver bullet. Shang-Chi had turned off a heavyweight soup. He was the cure. Frenchie argued that it was killing him. He pointed to the blackening veins. The energy exchange was necrotic. If Shang-Chi did that again, his heart would stop. Butcher didn't care. He said everyone dies. The question is what you die for. Huey stepped in, his voice shaking but firm. He said they couldn't use him like a battery. He said Shang-Chi was a person. Butcher rounded on Huey, grabbing him by the collar. He asked Huey how many people Homelander had to kill before Huey grew a spine. He asked if one life was worth a world free of monsters. Shang-Chi woke up. His vision was blurry. He could hear them arguing. He tried to sit up, but his body refused. He felt the connection to the city. He could feel the hollow people in East Brunswick. He could feel Stormfront's fear miles away. He was connected to the web of Vaught's sins. He realized that the Golden V wasn't just energy. It was a consciousness. It was a hunger. And it wanted to feed on the Compound 5. It was a predator designed to eat false gods. He spoke, his voice a whisper. He told them that Vought knew. He told them that Edgar knew what this was. That was why they were terrified. They weren't trying to capture a terrorist. They were trying to stop an extinction event. The news on a cracked TV in the corner of the depot broke the silence. The media was in a frenzy. Vought had released a statement. They claimed that the super-terrorist had released a biological weapon in the sewers. They showed images of victims, actually actors with skin lesions. But the real story was being whispered on the dark web. A leaked clip of Stormfront, powerless, being helped into a van. The facade of invincibility had cracked. The public was scared. But the criminal underworld, the politicians, the rivals, they were watching. If a god could bleed, if a god could be turned off, then the hierarchy of the world was up for grabs. In the Vought boardroom, the silence was absolute. Stan Edgar sat at the head of the table. Homelander stood at the window, his back to the room. He was vibrating with repressed rage. Stormfront was in the medical bay, her powers slowly returning, but the psychological damage was done. Edgar spoke calmly. He said the asset known as Shang-Chi was no longer a retrieval target. He was a Class 1 existential threat. He explained that the shareholders were panicked. The stock was dropping. The narrative was slipping. Homelander turned around. His eyes were glowing red. He asked if he could kill him now. Edgar nodded. He said he didn't care about the research anymore. He wanted the problem erased. He wanted it done publicly. He wanted the world to see what happens when you touch the gods. Back in the depot, Shang-Chi forced himself to sit up. He looked at his hands. The black veins were receding, returning to gold, but the pain remained. He looked at Butcher. He said he understood. He understood why Butcher hated them. But hate was a circle. It didn't end. He said he wouldn't be Butcher's gun. But he would finish this. He would go to the source. The data drive had coordinates for the main Vought laboratory, the tower itself. The original samples, the stabilizer serum that could cure the sickness, it was all there. He was going to the tower. Butcher laughed. He said that was suicide. That was walking into the lion's den wearing a steak necklace. Shang-Chi stood up, steadying himself on the table. He said he wasn't going to sneak in. He was going to knock. He looked at the boys. He asked them if they wanted to watch the tower fall. It was a pivot point. The reluctance in the room evaporated. They were tired of running. They were tired of hiding in sewers. If this was the end, it would be a loud one. Frenchie began prepping the weapons. Mother's Milk checked the ammo. Huey called Starlight on a burner phone, telling her to stay away, warning her that the storm was coming. Shang-Chi meditated, not to find peace, but to negotiate with the dragon inside him. He told the energy that they would feed. They would feed on the source, but only to save the people. It was a dangerous bargain. He was making a pact with a demon to kill the devils. The team loading up a stolen delivery truck. They weren't going to a safe house. They were driving straight into the heart of Manhattan. The sun was rising, casting long shadows over the city. Shang-Chi sat in the passenger seat, his eyes closed. He could feel Homelander's heartbeat from miles away. It was a drum of war. The escalation was complete. There was no going back. The timeline had been twisted into a knot, and the only way to untie it was to cut it. The war for the soul of this universe had begun. The dragon was coming for the Seven. The delivery truck rattled over the potholes of 8th Avenue, the suspension groaning under the weight of the tactical gear, and the heavy, suffocating silence of the men inside. Shang-Chi sat in the passenger seat, his hands folded in his lap. But there was no tranquility in the pose. The golden veins on his skin were pulsing with a violent, erratic rhythm, synchronized with a thrumming vibration that only he could hear. It was the call of the tower. Vought International wasn't just a building. To his altered senses, it was a festering wound in the sky, a nexus of artificial energy that tasted like copper and old blood. Every mile they drew closer, the sickness in his blood flared hotter, a fever that threatened to burn his mind away before they even breached the perimeter. Billy Butcher drove with a white-knuckled grip on the wheel, his eyes darting between the mirrors and the road, his face set in a rictus of hate. He knew this was a one-way trip. The plan was not extraction. The plan was destruction. In the back, Huey, Frenchie, and Mother's Milk checked their weapons for the 10th time, the mechanical clicks distinct against the roar of the city. They were marching into the Olympus of this world to kill the gods, and the absurdity of it hung over them like a shroud. The truck slammed into the curb outside the main plaza of Vought Tower. There was no stealth approach. The element of surprise had been burned in the sewers. Butcher didn't even bother with the handbrake. He kicked the door open and leveled his rifle, firing a burst into the air to scatter the civilians. The crowd screamed and broke, a chaotic tide of tourists and office workers fleeing the kill zone. Shang-Chi stepped out. He did not run. He walked toward the revolving glass doors, and the air around him began to warp. The golden V energy inside him was reacting to the proximity of the source. The glass doors didn't shatter, they melted. The heat radiating from him was intense, a physical manifestation of the war being fought inside his cells. Security guards in the lobby drew their weapons, their hands shaking. They had seen the news. They knew what this man had done to Stormfront. They fired, but the bullets never reached him. Shang-Chi didn't block them. The energy flaring from his body incinerated the lead in mid-air, turning the projectiles into harmless sprays of molten metal. He raised a hand, and a wave of force threw the guards against the marble walls, unconscious before they hit the ground. The lobby was vast, a cathedral to capitalism, adorned with massive statues of the Seven. Shang-Chi looked at the statue of Homelander, the golden face smiling down with a benevolence that masked a monster. The elevators dinged. The doors slid open. They were not empty. The Deep and A-Train stepped out, flanked by a squad of Vought tactical elites. The Deep looked terrified, clutching his trident like a lifeline, while A-Train vibrated with nervous energy, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit strategy. Butcher and the boys took cover behind the reception desk, opening fire on the tactical team. The lobby erupted into a storm of noise and debris. Shang-Chi did not take cover. He walked forward. A-Train blurred, a blue streak moving at Mach speeds, intending to flank Shang-Chi and deliver a kinetic strike to the back of the skull. It was the same move that had killed Popclaw's landlord, the same move that had shattered Robin. But Shang-Chi was not a civilian. He felt the shift in air pressure. He didn't track the speed. He tracked the intent. As A-Train closed the distance, Shang-Chi stomped his foot. It wasn't a physical impact. It was a release of the Golden V. A shockwave of dampening energy rippled out across the floor. A-Train hit the energy field and screamed. His superspeed didn't vanish, but it fouled. His metabolism crashed. He went from a supersonic blur to a tumbling, retching mess, crashing into a pillar with the force of a car wreck. He lay there, gasping, his heart hammering a frantic arrhythmia rhythm as the Golden V leached the compound phi from his system. The Deep saw this. The Deep saw the fastest man alive reduced to a shivering junkie in a second. He dropped his trident. He raised his hands. He wanted no part of the ghost that could eat powers. Shang-Chi didn't even look at him. He walked past the cowering hero and pressed the button for the express elevator. The ride up was agonizing. The proximity to the labs on the 99th floor was making the corruption in Shang-Chi's veins scream. He could feel the source, a massive vat of the golden V, unstable and critical. He looked at his reflection in the polished steel doors. His eyes were glowing with a solid, terrifying gold light. He looked less like a man, and more like the things he used to fight in the other timeline. Butcher stood next to him, reloading a magazine. He looked at Shang-Chi and asked if he could hold it together. Shang-Chi didn't answer. He couldn't. Speaking required breath he couldn't spare. The doors opened on the 80th floor. Queen Maeve stood there. She wasn't posturing. She was leaning against the wall, a sword in her hand, looking tired. She didn't attack. She looked at the boys, then at Shang-Chi. She saw the sickness. She saw the pain. She asked if it was true. She asked if he could really turn it off. Shang-Chi nodded. Maeve looked at her sword. She looked at the ceiling, where Homelander was undoubtedly waiting. She stepped aside. She told them to go. She said she was tired of the show. It was a small victory, a fracture in the Seven's unity, but it saved them precious time. They reached the 99th floor. The lab was a sterile fortress of glass and white polymer. In the center of the room, suspended in a magnetic containment field, was the source. It was a sphere of swirling golden liquid, the size of a car. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Wires and tubes ran from it into the walls, feeding the entire building, perhaps the entire city grid. Standing in front of it was not a scientist, but Homelander. He was calm, terrifyingly calm. He had his hands clasped behind his back. He watched them enter with the detached curiosity of a boy watching ants crawl across a sidewalk. He didn't look at Butcher. He looked at Shang-Chi. He smiled, and his eyes began to glow red. He said he had been waiting. He said he wanted to see the man who made Stormfront afraid. The violence was instantaneous. Homelander didn't monologue. He fired. 2 beams of concentrated heat vision lashed out, aiming to bisect Shang-Chi. In any other timeline, Shang-Chi would be dead. But the golden V was a defensive reflex now. Shang-Chi raised his hands, and the golden energy formed a barrier. The lasers hit the shield and refracted, slicing through the lab equipment, melting steel and shattering glass. The force of the impact drove Shang-Chi's feet into the floor, carving furrows in the concrete. He gritted his teeth, the strain causing blood to trickle from his nose. He couldn't hold this. Homelander was a nuclear reactor. Shang-Chi was a leaking battery. Butcher and the boys opened fire on Homelander. The high-caliber rounds bounced off his suit, useless. Homelander turned his head, a look of annoyance on his face, and lasered the ceiling above them, bringing down a ton of debris to bury the squad. Then he launched himself at Shang-Chi. The impact was tectonic. They crashed through the wall of the lab, tumbling out into the open air, falling 90 stories toward the streets of Manhattan. The wind roared. Homelander rained blows down on Shang-Chi, punches that could level skyscrapers. Shang-Chi blocked, parried, and redirected. He was fighting a god in freefall. He used the soft style to deflect the brute force, spinning in the air, using Homelander's momentum to slam him into the side of the building. Glass shattered in a cascading waterfall as they crashed back into the 50th floor offices. They tumbled across a bullpen of terrified accountants. Homelander stood up, brushing dust from his cape. He wasn't hurt. He was annoyed. Shang-Chi stood up, wheezing. His left arm was broken. He could feel the bone grating. But the golden V was adapting. It was surging to the injury, knitting the bone back together with agonizing speed. Homelander saw the gold light healing the wound. His expression changed from annoyance to genuine interest. He asked what Shang-Chi was. He asked where he came from. Shang-Chi didn't answer. He entered a combat stance. He signaled Homelander to come. Homelander flew forward, abandoning technique for speed. Shang-Chi didn't dodge. He stepped inside the guard. He placed both glowing palms on Homelander's chest. The connection was made. The drain began. Homelander gasped, his eyes widening. He felt the power leaving him. He felt the invulnerability fading. He felt the cold shock of mortality. For the first time in his life, he felt weak. He screamed, a sound of pure panic, and thrashed, trying to break the grip. But Shang-Chi held on, the corruption flowing from his veins into Homelander, poisoning the perfect V with the imperfect Chi. The golden veins began to spread across Homelander's suit, cracking the blue fabric. Butcher, who had rappelled down the elevator shaft, burst into the office floor. He saw the Titan on his knees. He saw the fear in Homelander's eyes. He screamed at Shang-Chi to finish it. He screamed at him to kill the bastard. Shang-Chi could feel it. He could feel Homelander's life force flickering. He could end the threat right now. He could rid the world of its greatest monster. But the cost was rising. The energy transfer was overloading the building's grid. The lights were blowing out. The structure was groaning. And more importantly, the connection to the source upstairs was spiking. If Shang-Chi drained Homelander dry, the feedback loop would detonate the sphere on the 99th floor. It would nuke Midtown. And then, the choice presented itself. Not a strategic choice, but a human one. Through the shattered windows, Shang-Chi saw a support helicopter, likely a news crew, spinning out of control. The energy surge had fried its tail rotor. It was careening toward the street below, directly toward a crowd of people trapped by the police barricades. In the cockpit, the pilot was wrestling with the stick. In the back, a cameraman was clinging to the door. They were innocent. They were the people his father would have ignored. They were the people Butcher would have called acceptable losses. Shang-Chi looked at Homelander, who was whimpering, broken, inches from death. He looked at the helicopter. He looked at Butcher, whose face was a mask of bloodthirsty anticipation. Shang-Chi made the calculation. He was a hero, not a soldier, not an assassin. A hero saves. He released Homelander. The sudden disconnection sent a backlash of energy through the room. Homelander collapsed, retching, clutching his chest. Shang-Chi spun around and ran to the broken window. He gathered every ounce of the golden V remaining in his system, the energy he needed to keep the sickness at bay, and projected it outward. A massive, tangible hand of golden light materialized in the air. It caught the helicopter 10 feet above the pavement. The strain was immense. Shang-Chi screamed, his vision going white. He lowered the aircraft gently to the ground. The crowd cheered. The pilot gave a thumbs up. But up in the office, the moment of mercy had a price. Homelander recovered. The fear he had felt turned instantly into a psychotic rage. He had been humiliated. He had been made to feel human, and he would burn the world to erase that memory. He stood up, his eyes glowing with a renewed, unstable intensity. He didn't attack Shang-Chi. He looked at the ceiling. He looked toward the lab upstairs. He realized what the energy was. He realized that as long as that sphere existed, he could be drained. So he decided to destroy the battery. Homelander flew straight up, punching through the floors, back to the 99th floor. Butcher watched him go, then turned to Shang-Chi, his face twisted in betrayal. He asked him what he had done. He asked him why he let the devil go. Shang-Chi slumped against the wall, exhausted, the golden light in his eyes dimming to a flicker. He whispered that he saved them. Butcher spat on the floor. He said he saved a few to doom the millions. The explosion happened 10 seconds later. Homelander didn't just break the containment sphere. He lasered it with maximum intensity. He vaporized the controls. The Golden V, unstable and now uncontained, didn't detonate like a bomb. It expanded. It was a silent, expanding sphere of golden distortion. It passed through the walls of Vought Tower. It passed through the streets. It passed through the flesh of every living thing in a 5-mile radius. The hollow sickness that had affected East Brunswick was a localized spill. This was a tidal wave. As the wave hit the office, Shang-Chi felt his connection to the universe snap. The pain vanished. The golden veins faded. But he felt empty. He looked at Butcher. Butcher was standing there, but his eyes were glassy. He dropped his rifle. He sat down on the floor, staring at nothing. The rage was gone. The drive was gone. He was just a shell. Shang-Chi looked out the window. The city was silent. Cars were rolling to stops as drivers simply took their feet off the pedals. Pedestrians sat down on the sidewalks. The screaming had stopped. The panic had stopped. New York City had just been lobotomized. The Golden V had stripped the volition, the aggression, and the drive from millions of people. It was peace, but it was the peace of the grave. Shang-Chi tried to summon his chi. Nothing. He tried to summon the Golden V. Nothing. He was baseline. He was just a man in a red tunic, standing in a dead city. He staggered to the stairwell. He had to get to the lab. He had to see if there was a reversal. He climbed the ruined stairs, stepping over Vought employees who were sitting on the steps, staring blankly at their hands. When he reached the 99th floor, the lab was gone. The roof was gone. Floating above the ruins was Homelander. But Homelander was not immune. He was hovering erratically. He looked at his hands. He looked at the city. He laughed. It was a broken, high-pitched sound. The blast had stripped him of his need for adoration. It had stripped him of his complex. He was just a being of pure power now, with no tether to humanity, no desire for love, only a vague, reptilian instinct to exist. He looked down at Shang-Chi. There was no recognition, no hate, just indifference. He turned and flew upward, breaking the sound barrier, disappearing into the clouds. He abandoned Vought. He abandoned the Seven. He abandoned Earth. Shang-Chi fell to his knees in the wreckage. He had made the choice to save the helicopter. He had chosen the micro over the macro. And because of that, Homelander had triggered the apocalypse. This was the cost of the hero's code in a villain's world. In the MCU, saving the helicopter would have been the right thing to do. Here, it was the tactical error that ended civilization. He crawled toward the console where the sphere had been. The databanks were fried. The cure was gone. But buried under a pile of rubble, a single monitor was blinking. It was a fail-safe protocol. A backup server. Not here. In the Vought archives in the basement. The place where he had started. The data hadn't been destroyed. It had been dumped to cold storage. There was still a chance. But he was alone. Butcher was hollow. The boys were likely hollow. The city was catatonic. And the strongest being on the planet was now a wandering god with the mind of a shark. Shang-Chi stood up. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small pendant his mother had given him. It was just jade. No magic. Just stone. He squeezed it until it cut his palm. The pain was grounding. He wasn't dead. And as long as he wasn't dead, the timeline wasn't closed. He limped toward the stairs. The descent would be long. The descent from the 99th floor was a journey through a purgatory of fluorescent lights and gray carpet. Shang-Chi moved with a limp. His left arm cradled against his ribs, makeshift splints fashioned from office rulers and duct tape holding the fractures in place. He did not run. He could not run. The adrenaline that had sustained him during the battle with Homelander had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache in his bones. The stairwell was silent. It was a silence that pressed against his eardrums, heavier than the roar of the city had ever been. On every landing, he stepped over the bodies of Vought employees. They were not dead. They were sitting, slumped against the walls or lying on the concrete, their chests rising and falling with a slow, mechanical rhythm. Their eyes were open, staring at nothing, void of spark, void of ambition, void of the chaotic human noise that defined existence. The Golden V shockwave had stripped them of their drive, leaving only the biological machinery of survival. It was a pacifist's nightmare. Peace had been achieved, but the cost was the soul. Shang-Chi reached the 50th floor and exited into the main workspace to find water. The scene was a tableau of frozen domesticity. A woman stood by the coffee machine, the pot overflowing, hot liquid spilling onto the floor and steaming, but she did not move to stop it. A man sat at his desk, his fingers resting on the keyboard, a sentence half finished on the screen. Shang-Chi drank from a water cooler, the bubbles gurgling loudly in the quiet room. He looked at the man. He waved his hand in front of the man's face. The pupils dilated slightly, a reflex, but there was no recognition. The consciousness was buried under layers of golden static. Shang-Chi realized the magnitude of his failure. By saving the helicopter, by choosing the immediate life over the strategic victory, he had allowed the source to be destroyed uncontrolled. He had saved a pilot and doomed a civilization to a waking coma. This was the lesson the universe was screaming at him. In a world without rules, the moral high ground was a trapdoor. He continued the descent. 40 floors, 30, 20. The physical toll was mounting. His legs trembled with every step. Without his chi to reinforce his muscles, he was feeling every bruise, every torn fiber. He was just a man, a well-trained man, perhaps the best-trained man on the planet. But biology had limits. He reached the lobby. The destruction from their entry was still there. Shattered glass, scorched walls. But the screaming crowds were gone. The security guards he had knocked out were awake now, sitting amidst the debris, staring at the dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight. The city outside the melted doors was a graveyard of motion. Cars sat idling in the streets until they ran out of gas. People sat on curbs. A pigeon landed on a man's shoulder, and the man did not brush it away. Shang-Chi moved toward the service elevators that led to the sub-basement archives. The panel was dead. The power surge had fried the main grid. He would have to pry the doors open and climb down the shaft. He jammed his fingers into the seam of the steel doors, gritting his teeth, straining against the heavy mechanism. His broken arm flared with agony, white spots dancing in his vision. He shouted, a raw, guttural sound of effort, and the doors gave way with a screech of metal. The shaft was dark, smelling of grease and ozone. He grabbed the oily cable and began to slide down, wrapping his legs around the wire to slow his descent. The friction burned through his pants, searing his skin, but he focused on the pain. Pain was good. Pain meant he was still awake. Pain meant he hadn't been hollowed out. He landed on the roof of the elevator car at the bottom of the shaft and opened the maintenance hatch. He dropped into the car, then pried the interior doors open. The sub-basement was different. The air here was scrubbed, recycled, and cold. Emergency lights bathed the corridor in a pulsing red glow. This level was shielded, hardened against nuclear strikes, biological incursions, and apparently metaphysical shockwaves. Shang-Chi walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing. He expected automated turrets. He expected lasers. He found nothing but open doors. At the end of the hall stood the heavy blast door of the archive server room. It was slightly ajar. Shang-Chi pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was a cavern of humming servers, the fans whirring loudly, cooling the massive databanks that held 70 years of corporate sins. In the center of the room, sitting on a simple folding chair in front of a terminal, was Stan Edgar. The CEO of Vought did not look like a man who had just lost his empire. He looked like a man who was waiting for a train. He wore his pristine suit, his glasses reflecting the red emergency lights. He was typing a command into the console. He stopped when Shang-Chi entered. He swiveled the chair around. He didn't look afraid. He looked disappointed. He noted that Shang-Chi looked terrible. He commented on the irony of a man who could dodge bullets being undone by a staircase. Shang-Chi ignored the banter. He asked if Edgar was affected. Edgar tapped his temple. He explained that this room was a Faraday cage for more than just electricity. He had prepared for Homelander losing his mind for 20 years. He had not prepared for a mystic, but the shielding held up against the golden V radiation regardless. Shang-Chi stepped forward, his breathing ragged. He told Edgar to move away from the console. He said he was going to reverse the signal. Edgar laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. He asked why he would want to do that. He gestured to the monitors on the wall, which showed feeds from around the building and the city. He pointed out the peace. No crime. No screaming. No protests. No soups causing collateral damage. The stock market had crashed, yes, but the product, humanity, was finally stable. Vought had always been in the business of management. This was the ultimate management. He told Shang-Chi that he was doing the world a favor by leaving it this way. The Golden V didn't kill them. It just turned down the volume. Shang-Chi shook his head. He said it wasn't peace. It was slavery. A life without will was not life. It was just biology. He moved to shove Edgar aside. Edgar didn't resist. He simply stood up and smoothed his jacket. He said he couldn't let Shang-Chi do it. Not because of ideology, but because of liability. If the world woke up, they would remember the Flash. They would blame Vought. The lawsuits would be infinite. But if they stayed asleep, Vought could rebuild the narrative. They could claim it was a virus. They could sell the cure slowly. Subscription-based sanity. Shang-Chi struck, a quick jab to the throat to silence the man. But his hand stopped inches from Edgar's neck. A gloved hand had caught his wrist. From the shadows of the server racks, a figure emerged. It was Black Noir. But he was wrong. Half of his mask was torn away, revealing burned, scarred tissue and a dead, white eye. His suit was tattered. He moved with a jerky, spasmodic rhythm. The shockwave hadn't hollowed him out because there was nothing left to hollow. Noir was already a shell, driven by conditioning and Vought nanites. He was a biological robot, and he had been waiting in the dark. Noir squeezed Shang-Chi's broken arm. The sound of bone grinding was audible. Shang-Chi gasped and dropped to one knee, but he didn't freeze. He spun, sweeping Noir's legs. Noir didn't fall. He was too heavy, too dense. He simply absorbed the impact and kicked Shang-Chi in the chest. Shang-Chi flew backward, crashing into a rack of servers. Sparks showered down. Noir advanced, silent, relentless. This was the final test. No magic, no energy beams. Just a broken master against a broken monster. Shang-Chi scrambled up. He couldn't trade blows. Noir was superhumanly strong, and Shang-Chi was operating on fumes. He had to use the environment. He had to think. Noir lunged, leading with a knife he had pulled from his boot. Shang-Chi sidestepped, the blade slicing his jacket. He grabbed a loose bundle of fiber optic cables and whipped them around Noir's neck, pulling tight, trying to choke the soup. Noir didn't gasp. He didn't need to breathe. He reached back, grabbed Shang-Chi by the hair, and threw him over his shoulder. Shang-Chi hit the concrete floor hard. He tasted blood. Edgar watched, impassive. He told Noir to make it clean. Shang-Chi rolled as Noir stomped, the boot cracking the floor where his head had been. Shang-Chi targeted the damage. Noir's mask was torn. His skull was likely fractured from previous fights. Shang-Chi grabbed a shard of metal from the broken server rack. It was sharp, jagged. He waited. Noir came in for a grapple. Shang-Chi slipped inside the guard, moving like water, sacrificing his body to get close. He took a punch to the shoulder that dislocated the joint, screaming through his teeth. but he drove the metal shard into the exposed gap in Noir's mask, directly into the soft tissue of the eye socket. Noir stiffened. He flailed, striking blindly. Shang-Chi didn't let go. He drove the shard deeper, twisting it. He wasn't trying to kill the man. He was trying to destroy the brainstem. He was trying to disconnect the hardware. Noir seized, his body vibrating violently, and then he collapsed, heavy and dead, on top of Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi shoved the corpse off him. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, tears of pain leaking from his eyes. His left arm was useless. His right shoulder was dislocated. He was battered, bleeding, and alone. But he was alive. He forced himself up. He looked at Edgar. The CEO looked at his fallen enforcer, then at Shang-Chi. He adjusted his glasses. He said nothing. He simply walked out of the room. He knew when a negotiation was over. He wasn't a fighter. He was a survivor. He would leave, find a helicopter, and spin the story from a bunker in Belize. Shang-Chi let him go. The man didn't matter. The machine did. Shang-Chi limped to the console. He looked at the screen. The failsafe was there. Protocol Sunrise. It was designed to flush the V compound from the system in case of a contagion, using the building's massive power grid to send a counterpulse. But the grid was down. The generators were offline. The only power source in the room was the residual energy in the golden V capacitors, the batteries that had stored the energy drained from the test subjects. It wasn't electricity. It was raw, corrupted life force. He read the schematics. To release it, to broadcast the wake-up signal, he couldn't just press a button. The circuit was incomplete. The transmission array on the roof was disconnected from the basement. He needed a bridge, a conductor to close the loop between the capacitors and the emitter. He looked at the two heavy copper leads hanging from the wall. They were designed to be plugged into a generator. He realized what he had to do. He looked at his hands. They were trembling. He thought of his sister. He thought of Katie. He thought of the timeline he had left behind. If he did this, the energy would pass through him. It would scour his meridians. It would burn out the pathways that allowed him to harness Chi. He would never be the dragon again. He would never be able to punch a soul eater or ride the wind. He would just be a man in a broken world. He thought of the man in the lobby with the pigeon on his shoulder. He thought of the silence. It wasn't a choice. It was a duty. Shang-Chi grabbed the two copper leads. He screamed as the connection was made. It wasn't like the golden V sickness. This was fire. Pure, white fire. It rushed into his left hand, traveled across his chest, and exploded out of his right hand into the terminal. His back arched. His vision went white. He could feel his nervous system lighting up like a city grid. The smell of burning ozone and scorching flesh filled the room. He felt the chi in his body, the cultivation of a lifetime, rising up to meet the intrusion, fighting it, and then being incinerated. The magic was being burned away to fuel the machine. The servers roared to life. The lights in the room turned from red to blinding white. A hum began, low at first, then rising to a deafening whine. The signal shot up the spine of the tower, bypassing the fried elevators, bypassing the silent floors, reaching the transmitter on the roof. The pulse went out. It was invisible, but it was felt. Across Manhattan, across the boroughs, across the blast radius. It wasn't a gentle awakening. It was a violent jolt. People on the street gasped, their lungs filling with air as if they had been drowning. The man with the pigeon flinched, scaring the bird away. Cars that had rolled to a stop were suddenly restarted. The silence shattered. A million voices cried out in confusion, in pain, in fear. Car horns began to blare. Sirens started up. The roar of the city returned, ugly and chaotic and beautiful. In the basement, Shang-Chi was thrown backward. He hit the wall and slid down, smoke rising from his jacket. His hands were charred. His chest felt empty. He tried to breathe, to find the center, to find the flow of energy that had always been there since he was a child. There was nothing, just the beat of his heart, just the ache of his bones. He was empty. He lay there for a long time. He listened to the faint sounds of chaos filtering down from the streets above. It worked. They were awake. They were miserable, terrified, and traumatized. But they were awake. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time was slippery. The blast door creaked. Shang-Chi couldn't lift his head to see who it was. He expected Edgar returning with a gun. He expected a security team. "Oi!" The voice was rough, gravel and tar. Shang-Chi managed to turn his head. Billy Butcher stood in the doorway. He looked like hell. His eyes were bloodshot, his trench coat covered in dust. He was leaning against the frame, holding a crowbar, looking at Shang-Chi with a mix of confusion and grudging respect. Behind him, Huey was peering in, looking pale and sick, but conscious. Butcher walked over. He looked at the fried console. He looked at Noir's corpse. He looked at Shang-Chi's burned hands. He didn't say thank you. He didn't offer a hand. He just sat down on the floor next to Shang-Chi. He pulled a pack of cigarettes from his pocket. It was crumpled. He managed to fish one out, light it with a Zippo, and take a long drag. He exhaled a blue cloud toward the ceiling. "You look like a piece of fried chicken, mate," Butcher said. Shang-Chi tried to laugh, but it came out as a wheeze. "The city?" he whispered. His voice was a rasp. "Loud," Butcher said. "Angry. Everyone's got a headache the size of Texas. Vought stocks are trading at zero. They're burning the tower down on the news. Riots, looting. It's beautiful." "Homelander?" Shang-Chi asked. Butcher paused. He looked at the cigarette. "Gone. Radar's lost him over the Atlantic. Maybe he's dead. Maybe he's just done. Doesn't matter. He ain't here." Huey stepped into the room. He looked at Shang-Chi. "You did it," he said softly. "You actually fixed it." Shang-Chi looked at his hands. "I broke it," he said. "I broke the cycle." Butcher offered the cigarette to Shang-Chi. It was a filthy habit. It was poison. It was exactly what a normal human would do. Shang-Chi took it with shaking fingers. He took a drag. It burned his throat. It tasted terrible. It tasted real. "So," Butcher said, staring at Noir's dead eye, "you're stuck here then? No magic ticket home?" Shang-Chi closed his eyes. He reached for the connection to the Great Protector. Silence. He reached for the Dweller. Silence. He was grounded. "No," he said. "I'm here." "Good," Butcher said. He stood up, groaning, his knees popping. "'Cause we got work to do. Vaught's down, but Edgar's in the wind, and there's a lot of soups out there who just woke up, realized they ain't gods anymore. Someone's got to remind them." He extended a hand to Shang-Chi, not as a commander to a soldier, not as a user to a tool, but as a man to a man. "You coming, or are you gonna nap on the floor all day?" Shang-Chi looked at the hand. He looked at the red emergency light. He thought of the 10 rings, the power, the destiny he had thought was written in stone. It was all gone. He was just Shang-Chi now, a guy from San Francisco who knew how to fight. And maybe, in a world like this, that was enough. He reached up. He gripped Butcher's hand. It was rough, callous and warm. Butcher pulled him up. Shang-Chi swayed, but he stood. He adjusted his tattered red tunic. He looked at the door. "I'm coming," Shang-Chi said. They walked out of the server room, leaving the darkness behind, stepping into the hallway that led back to the broken, loud, messy world. The timeline wasn't fixed. It wasn't healed. It was scarred. But it was theirs. The screen fades to black. The sound of a single, steady heartbeat plays. Then silence. 6 months after the fall of the tower, the world had not returned to normal. It had simply traded one anxiety for another. Vought International was currently the defendant in over 40,000 class action lawsuits. The congressional hearings were broadcast daily, featuring weeping executives and redacted documents that confirmed what the streets already knew. The Golden Pulse was officially classified by the government as a mass psychogenic illness caused by a proprietary experimental gas leak, but nobody believed the press release. The truth was written on the walls of the subway stations in graffiti that Vought cleaning crews could not scrub away fast enough. The age of the untouchable god was over. The age of the frightened superhuman had begun. In a converted auto body shop in Queens, the morning light filtered through dirty skylights. The space had been cleared of cars. Heavy rubber mats covered the oil-stained concrete. Shang-Chi stood in the center of the room. He moved through a form, but there was no wind, no glowing energy, no dragon scales. There was only the snap of fabric and the sound of sharp exhalations. He was slower now. The limp from the server room never fully healed, and his left hand bore a web of burned scars that looked like lightning strikes, a permanent reminder of the circuit he closed. He finished the set and turned to his student. Huey Campbell stood there, sweating, wearing boxing gloves that looked too big for his hands. Shang-Chi corrected his stance. He tapped Huey's elbow, dropping it lower to protect the ribs. He told him that power did not come from the drug. It came from the ground. It came from the structure. Billy Butcher leaned against the metal doorframe, eating a breakfast sandwich wrapped in grease paper. He watched the lesson with a look that was hard to read. It might have been boredom, or it might have been a begrudging patience. The dynamic of the team had shifted. They were no longer insurgents running from an airstrike. They were hunters, clearing out a nest. They still had a list. It was long. It included the supes who went into hiding, the scientists who sold the data on the black market, and the politicians who looked the other way. But the methods had changed. They were not just blowing things up. They were dismantling the philosophy. Shang-Chi wiped his face with a towel and walked over to the window. The skyline of New York was visible in the distance. The Vought Tower still stood, a blackened, hollow shell, a tombstone for an empire that flew too close to the sun. Somewhere out there, Homelander was still missing. There were rumors of a drifter in the Midwest, a man who stared at the sky and wept, but no one had confirmed them. The boogeyman had vanished, leaving behind a world that had to learn how to be brave without being bulletproof. Shang-Chi touched the jade pendant in his pocket. He was thousands of miles and a whole dimension away from home. He would likely never see Ta Lo again. He would never see Zolling. But as he watched Huey shadowboxing, trying to find his balance, Shang-Chi realized he hadn't lost his purpose. He just changed the scale. He isn't saving the universe anymore. He is just trying to make sure the next punch thrown in this city is thrown for the right reason. He turned back to the room. He claps his hands. He told them to run it again. The work continues.